Hi everybody, this is B007 back for another 10-minute spoiler-free movie review. And today I'm talking to you about Ryan Gosling's directorial debut, Lost River, which is certainly one of the weirdest, most surreal, darkest, most goth films I've seen all year, and certainly one of the hardest to get a hold of. It's a film in which Ryan Gosling wears his influences very heavily on his heart sleeve. So there's lots of David Lynch influence in here, some Terry Gilliam, the movie Tideland springs to mind, Gaspar Noé, and it's interesting that he's used Gaspar Noé's longtime collaborative cinematographer to shoot this film. But most of all, I think it's a movie that bears the influence of the director Nicholas Winding Refn, who most famously directed Ryan Gosling in Drive, which was a massive hit, and then after that in Only God Forgives, which was far more critically coolly received. It's actually a podcast review I've done earlier in the series, so you can check that out on iTunes too. I think when I watched Only God Forgives, I felt it was a noble failure insofar as it didn't hold my attention and it didn't get me involved emotionally. But there were set pieces in that film that were so beautiful and stunningly scored that I almost wanted to lift out these 3-minute episodes and put them together in a sort of 20-minute conceptual art video and just look at it as a work of visual genius and forget about the surrounding film. And interestingly, that's kind of how I view Lost River. That overall as a movie, it just feels too stretched out, too baggy, too claustrophobic, too meandering. And yet, it's still worth watching. Because within that, there are these set pieces that are absolutely stunning, that stay with you visually and are just, they betray in them more directorial talent and genius than most mainstream hits. So you could be one of those critics who sits on the sideline and is very alienated and uninterested in the film and spots the directorial influences and accuses Gosling of being indulgent and derivative. But I think it's far more interesting to watch this film and say, look at how well he has observed his directors and the rich cinema history that he has absorbed, and really wonder what he's going to do next and see this as a taster for a future directorial career, which I really hope takes off. So what is the film Lost River about? It's set in current Detroit, and what a wonderful environment in which to tell a tale about decay and claustrophobia and feeling trapped, because it's this hollowed out post-industrial city that has far too little population for it, where the local politicians are literally switching off the lights in certain neighborhoods. And actually the way that Gosling has photographed it reminds me a lot of Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive, because it looks beautiful, but it does look like a dystopian post-apocalyptic vision. When you see movies like Insurgent and The Hunger Games, that's the kind of environment it's creating. And in this neighborhood, in this crumbling old house, we have a single mother, played by Christina Hendricks from Mad Men. And she has 2 sons, a teenager, played by Iain de Caestecker from Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and a little baby boy. And despite the fact that she should evidently leave this house, she is desperate to stay. And she's desperate to stay despite the fact that she's been missold a horrible mortgage on her house. And she goes to see her banker and pleads with him to let her stay. And he basically washes his hands of the guilt of mis-selling the mortgage, but says, look, I can get you a job. And isn't this wonderful? Isn't this an absolute story of our times, to have this structural decline of the West decay, but also a banker as the big bad? I mean, that to me is a total GFC story. So he gets her this job, and he's played by Ben Mendelsohn in this wonderfully sleazy, oleaginous role. And he gets her this job in this really dodgy nightclub. It's kind of like a vaudeville club. The architecture of it's amazing. I think it's shot in an old Masonic hall in Detroit. It's the set to die for. And basically what happens in this club is that you have these leering, voyeuristic townsfolk who are delighting in seeing pretty young women undergo exploitation and violence, and it's really a sight to behold. And some of the most beautifully scored and shot set pieces in the film take place in this club, and the use of light is just stunning, and the colour palette of those scenes. And I have to say, kudos to Eva Mendes, who plays the nightclub star. She's really quite stunning. It's a cameo role, but she's very good in this. And wonderfully, wonderfully shot. So while Christina Hendricks, a single mum, is trying to earn money through performing at this club, which is so exploitative, her eldest son is also trying to make ends meet by becoming a sort of scavenger for scrap metal. And he forms a tentative relationship with a young girl played by Saoirse Ronan. And she lives with her grandma, who just sits in the house all day watching old VHS tapes of when she was on TV looking young and glamorous. And I guess that's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for the theme of this film, which is people who are trapped, absolutely trapped inside a decaying relic of a better and more glamorous past. And the young teenage boy is also pursued by a kind of gangster bully, like one of the few guys left in town. And he's played bizarrely against type by Matt Smith of Doctor Who. And it's such an odd character. It's kind of like something out of Mad Men. This guy's kind of riding around town on the back of a Cadillac, sitting in a sofa that's kind of been strapped to it. It's one of the most visually arresting images of the film. So, in a sense, what's happened is Ryan Gosling has set up these very interesting characters in very interesting positions that reflect, in a kind of dark gothic horror way, the economic traps that we can fall into in the current world. And yet I just somehow feel that what he does with those characters isn't tightly enough written, or it just somehow doesn't hang together in a way that I can emotionally engage with it. And then in the final 20 minutes of this film, it goes almost beyond surreal gothic horror into something very fantastic that's to do with the title of the film, Lost River. And I won't say more, because I think, you should be able to make that journey on your own and be surprised by it. But I'm just not sure that by the time that cool fantasy payoff happens, enough of the audience is still going to be with Ryan Gosling to go on that journey with him. But my goodness, how brave of him to do that. I mean, this really is the ultimate genre-defying film. So as I said, overall, I'm not sure it's a film that... It's not a film that I like. It's not a film that I enjoyed watching as a whole. But my goodness, there were scenes that I loved. It's a film that I admire tremendously. And I admire Ryan Gosling for making it, even though this is like 25% of him as a finished product. But my goodness, it makes you anxious to see what he's going to do next. So, if you've seen Lost River and agree or disagree with my take, please feel free to leave a comment on the blog at b007.com. You can find my review of Nicholas Winding Refn's film Only God Forgives and Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive on B007 Movie Reviews on iTunes. And with that, thank you for listening.